Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexi the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. We've got a sort of a newsy episode this week. We're talking a little bit about some quick bits and bobs from around the news holes.
We should say when we're recording, in case people are mad that the world has gone to hell since we recorded, because we'll catch up on that later. But
yeah,
for now, it's what day is it? Wednesday?
Wednesday, August 9th. So we're recording a little in advance this time, but that's all right. Yeah, so some stuff that I learned from going around to various homepages. It's funny, with Twitter in decline and nothing really replacing it, plus Google becoming horribly beshitted, I end up just going to, WashingtonPost.com, where I learned that Joe Biden he's announced a new national monument in my neck of the woods, back in the Southwest.
I thought you were going to say in your honor, which would have been amazing.
No,
he's announcing a national monument in my honor.
That would be stealing valor in a terrible way. We would get canceled up and down, Blue Sky, Macedon, everywhere. No, so this one is all about, Native folks in the Southwest near Grand Canyon. It's called Baj Nawab. Okay, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this. In fact, yeah, it's called Ancestral Footprints of the Grand Canyon, kind of near the Grand Canyon. And the main takeaway is that there's a fair bit of uranium in that part of the country, and now it's off limits to mining, for as long as the monument persists. It's not that much uranium, but it's some, and lots of the Southwest has been historically had a lot of uranium mines there back in the glory days of the nuclear power industry, the 1960s, 1970s. A lot of it comes from overseas, but now we're trying to develop domestic sources, but they won't be here. So that's nice. Little throwing a little bone to the tribes out in the Southwest. Second piece of news is we have new Davis-Bacon Act prevailing wage standard regulations coming down the pike. This was actually a story broken on the Prospect by Lee Harris, who was the first to report on this coming out. And this, boy, it's quite complicated.
Is the bacon part of it because it's going to save some bacon for the workers? It's going to give workers more bacon.
More bacon, additional, yes. Pork barrel, literally. But basically, when the federal government, gives like companies grants or does like infrastructure spending, it has to decide how much to pay the people who are doing it. And up until the 1980s, there was the rule was it had to be the payment was at least 30% of the workforce. Like the wage was that is being paid to 30% of the workforce, and that helped unions a lot because they typically had like a whole
minimum wage. I mean, it had the floor. So spell that out a bit more. So what the rule is about what the floor had to be, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it's complicated, but basically, no, I think you're right actually to say that contractors and the government had to pay at least the prevailing wage, which was defined as if it was paid to at least 30% of workers in an area. So like a wage that was paid to at least 30%. And that benefited unions quite a bit because they'd have a whole bunch of people making the same amount of money exactly. And if you couldn't find that figure exactly, then the standard was calculated as the weighted average of all the workers in the area. Reagan changed that to just be like 50% plus one. So basically you could just take the lowest amount. And that was in 1982. And it's sort of counterintuitive, but like basically if you run through the math, then this means that the government will be paying people more, be forcing contractors to pay people more if they accept federal grants. And this is regarded as a big win for unions. in part because, as we've reported at the Prospect, with all this green investment that's happening, like the bulk of it is going to red states because red states are right to work states. They have lower wages. And so the businesses are going where it's cheaper to operate. And this will make it more expensive to operate. And it will make the union labor more competitive. And it will boost wages in the areas where these jobs are going. And so this is a major sort of sop to the labor movement and an attempt, I think, politically to say, like, we're doing all these all this green investment jobs, and we want them to be good jobs, not McJobs. And that's been a mixed success at best, I would say. But, this is the kind of thing that could actually put some real teeth into that by boosting up the wages.
And to be clear, this is the Biden administration's executive action through the Labor Department, right? So
yeah,
it's
exactly.
A labor rule.
Yeah. There's all kinds of stuff like this, just like all of the 100 years of disused authorities that have just been gathering dust, But yeah, so, a couple of nice pieces of news to lead off on. I feel like this is kind of the story of the Biden administration in many ways. Like several months ago, they did that new federal oil sale up in Alaska, and all the, a lot of native groups really pissed about that. Environmentalists. Well, now we're coming back to the other side. He's like trying to please everybody, basically. So yeah, I think our main story, our top story tonight, is the Trump indictment.
It should be music. Can we have some little fun music in there?
Yeah, sure. There's been a little bit of breaking news that I saw right as we were starting this. In the original indictment from Jack Smith, for trying to overthrow the government, there were a number of co-conspirators named but not indicted. One of them was Kenneth Chesebro. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it or if it's Cheesebro. Cheesebro
is
a
bro for sure.
One of these psycho lawyers, who was involved in the, preposterous legal scheme to, create slates of fake electors such that Trump could declare that he actually won the election. Classic kind of, every coup just about, or most of them anyway, have some sort of like faux legality applied to them. Like you dream up some ridiculous excuse for why what you're doing is not hugely illegal. But
yeah, you always have to couch it under the guise of legitimacy, right?
Yeah. But he said in this December 14th, 2020 memo, quote, "My point here is that it is important that the alternate slates of electors meet and vote on December 14 if we are to create a scenario under which Biden can be prevented from reaching 270 electoral votes, even if Trump has not managed by then to obtain court decisions or state legislative resolutions invalidating enough results to push Biden below 270. So just a straight up admission that even if they lost all of their lawsuits and didn't get state governments to invalidate the results, they were still going to try to go ahead, or they still had it. This was still the plan. Yeah, and that fits, I think, with a recent interview from John Eastman, in which he said,
another lawyer for Trump.
Yeah, he was another one of I think he was co-conspirator number one, and he was sort of the architect of this whole scheme. I've met this guy, by the way. Really? What's he like?
Yeah. For an extended amount of time too. We could get back. Let's do the news, and then I'll tell you a little bit about that. But just okay. Want to toss that in there.
Yeah. So he said in this interview with Claremont Institute's board of directors chairman Tom Klingenstein. In this interview, Eastman said, quote, he said that the 2020 election represented a, quote, existential threat to the very survivability, not just of our nation, but of the example that our nation properly understood provides to the world. And he referenced the Declaration of Independence. He said, quote, "There's actually a provision in the Declaration of Independence that a people will suffer abuses while they remain sufferable, tolerable while they remain tolerable. At some point, abuses become so intolerable that it becomes not only their right, but their duty to alter or abolish the existing government." So right there.
Nice.
He was doing the same kind of thing that the American revolutionaries are doing against the British government in the American Revolution, which is overthrowing it, not to create, a republic or whatever, but to create a dictatorship. Abolish, using the word abolish. That it was like, yeah,
it's pretty clear, pretty straightforward.
He admitted.
Yeah. He's, I think I just met him for a couple hours, one day, but it was in the context of, kind of academic circle. He was, among a lot of people that he considered fellow travelers. So he, I think, spoke pretty freely, and, he had a lot of energy. He was a short guy, but had a high energy, and was amiable and all that, but certainly seemed like less interested in academic discourse as such and more interested in partisan power, which, so I wasn't totally surprised that he ended up in the position that he ended up in, because he's really a guy who seemed like he'd get fired up about the good guys winning in his mind and how to achieve that. Right. So, it's funny though, when you meet people like that and these things happen, you just, you just never know who you meet and where they're going to end up, I guess. But no, I've met a number of conservatives that ended up in different degrees of infamy. And I could tell you more about that sometime. The dumbest by far is Stephen Moore, the quote unquote economist. He was the least interesting, least impressive. Again, apparently guileless, nice enough guy, but just dumb as a doornail, man. Oh my God. Besides being thoroughly partisan and, drinking his Kool-Aid, boy, not a lot going on there. Sorry. Back to the news.
Stephen Moore seems like a kind of guy that basically akin to a sort of pull string doll, like Woody in Toy Story, where he just is like, yes, Republican policy good, Democrat policy bad.
So super nice guy, but just like probably the easiest person to manipulate in the world, by those that he wants to get in good with, right? And Eastman was smarter than that, but also clearly really interested in his agenda and his team, and I could almost picture these people in high school, right?
Yeah,
and who they wanted to be part of the cool crew, and had different roles they'd want to play, but
it's kind of evil. Maybe it's the stupid versus evil.
That's right.
These are the types of people that are in Republican politics. Yeah. And, I think the fact that Eastman is going on, I wrote an article along these lines, but the fact that Eastman is going on like public interviews and talking about how, we were doing the Declaration of Independence. We were doing revolution. I think it tends to indicate that they know if this is a fair trial, they're all going down. That all this evidence, the stuff in the indictment, it's a lot of very telling stuff. Trump telling Pence that you're too honest, it indicates consciousness of guilt, and like that you're a lawyer, right? You would know more. Like there's this sort of mens rea question about like having the intention. And it seemed like, that indicates that on some level, Trump knew he was doing the bad thing, but like, you can't get out of being, having a guilty conscience, simply by being someone with like narcissistic personality disorder who just will believe anything, It's like if tons and tons of credentialed people. And that's I think a smart thing about the indictment. In fact, that there's all these Republicans who are quoted in it saying like, I'm not going to betray my oath to the Constitution. I voted for Trump, but he lost fair and square. And that's just how it is. I'm not going to overturn it for him. Yeah. All these Justice Department officials telling him, it's like he makes some ridiculous claim. And then the director of national intelligence will come in and say like, that's bullshit, man. That's not true. This is wackadoo stuff. It didn't happen. And then he just go and repeat it again on Twitter like 5 minutes later. That, the willful disregard for the facts, I think as a sort of like legal, effect there, I would hope at least.
Well, look, and just so without speaking on this particular case, but just generally speaking, it doesn't always function this way, obviously, because of the politics and power involved in legality. But most standards that judge something like was the act intentional or was it negligent, or things that have to do with volition or your mindset. You have, sure, testimony and evidence for your subjective state of mind, but usually what matters is like, what would a reasonable person, quote unquote, right, whatever that might be, but that's almost always like, what would the reasonable person think in this kind of situation, or what would the reasonable person think? Let's give an example in terms of like negligence, which is obviously negligence is an unintentional tort, right? It's an unintentional harm that you cause to someone. But like duty of care to someone that's like a stranger, what you think about, not like if you are an outlier in some way, or if you're the person being harmed, if you're hypersensitive, that isn't as important as like what a reasonable person would think is a breach of a duty of care, or like emotional distress. What would a reasonable person think? What would a reasonable person, how would they feel in a certain situation? And is that emotional distress or not? Or if you're just like a hypersensitive Karen and you see a person of color in the park and you're distressed, that doesn't justify the actions that follow just because subjectively you have some kind of personality disorder or whatever, right? So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but like the objective reasonableness standard is usually kind of the way to think through most of these situations, and that doesn't let people off the hook because they're outliers psychologically, right?
Yeah, and when he's saying shit like, what was it? Telling Mike Pence, it's like just say it was corrupt and leave it up to me and the Republican members of Congress, or when he's like on the phone with the Georgia Secretary of State. And in fact, I want to get to that. And another probable coming indictment in a second. He's saying it like, we just need 11,200 votes or however many it was, like he's clearly just a guy who's bound and determined to find any excuse whatsoever to do the thing that he wants to do. And he does not care what the truth is at all. The fact that he can seemingly parrot Newsmax horse shit with a straight face, that's no defense.
No reasonable person would think that he's doing anything other than just trying to will to power, right? Like just anything, right? It's not plausible that his state of mind was not grievously, violating the law and the Constitution. I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah. And
probably,
so this
probably clear for most of these guys, right?
Yeah. Well, especially for Eastman, Jesus, this is hell yes, I ordered the code red, basically.
Oh, you got to insert that, Jack Nicholson.
Yeah. You're goddamn right, I did. Yeah, that one. So this explains their legal strategy, which is just to drag everything out to past the election. It's just a delay, hope that they win the election, and then just like you're president and you can just put a lid on this somehow. The last week they burned up almost a whole week now on this protective order. Like basically Jack Smith, the special counsel, is trying to like speed things up. He sees what's going on. And so he wanted to give Trump just get the discovery process over as quickly as possible. But before he turned over his materials, he wanted a protective order saying that Trump couldn't discuss the evidence in public, which is like totally routine. And especially warranted in this case, because for a fact the second that he gets it, he's going to get on Truth Social and take everything out, whatever is in there, out of context, or just lie about what it says, and whip up a case in the media about, to influence the trial, to try to like influence the jury or whatever. And so, get him to shut the fuck up for 5 seconds, which like that's difficult for Trump. And so they've just gone back and forth with all these motions and requests for hearings, and Trump wants a different protective order. And now they're going to have a in-person argument about it later this week. And this is all going super fast by federal judiciary standards. I think the judge also, knows what's going on here. But and
have we spelled it out to the audience what's going on? Like why Trump, other than wanting to be able to use social media, of course, to poison the well, he and his team clearly know that the only way through this is to postpone, and then hopefully win the next presidential election. Yeah.
And once you've done that, you figure you got the powers of the presidency, just purge the Justice Department, issue some order, the Supreme Court will probably back you up, say it's all whatever, have the Manhattan DA arrested for treason or something. Prosecuting a sitting president is, especially sitting President Trump, that's it's difficult. That's what impeachment is supposed to be for, but impeachment is broken, doesn't work. One last thing to note about this is that this, Merrick Garland is largely responsible for this state of affairs, the timing situation, at least. He sat on his hands. He dithered from March 10th or whatever, when he was confirmed in 2021 to November 2022. That's when he appointed Jack Smith, the special counsel. And he had, the advantage of the January 6th committee stuff that they dug up. And so he got his thing done in like eight and a half months, something like that. Pretty quick for a massive federal investigation. But I would bet money he could have gotten it done in a year if, he'd been appointed right away. This isn't a hard case to make. Half of it's just public information. The call we referenced.
Garland, man. He is just the epitome of what you once wrote, and correct me how you actually phrase this. It's like the limp dish rag Democrat, right?
Yeah.
Just totally just incapable of using power to advance anyone's interest. It's just completely worthless, right?
Yeah, it's just like Obama when he let Mitch McConnell buffalo him into not making a statement on the Trump benefiting from the Russian interference effort because he thought it would look partisan.
Yeah, and of course Garland was Obama's pick, lest we forget, right?
Yeah.
For the spot that never was to be.
Loser.
I just love don't you just love how blatant the political differences in how the Democrats and the Republicans maneuver? The Republicans are like, yeah, you're just not going to have that seat. Just advise and consent. That's constitutionally required of us. Nah, we're just going to not meet with your nominee at all. And we're just going to wait this out. Right.
Yeah. Though it does, on the other hand, it strikes me as kind of funny. Remember the Robert Mueller, hero worship? The Krasenstein brothers who wrote that horrific children's book. There's that podcast Mueller She Wrote that was going over every aspect of the investigation. I think that's still going. But
there's that tendency, especially from liberals, to do some hero worship of a certain elite political actor, hoping they'll save the day.
Yeah. And, I guess to give Mueller a little bit of credit, investigating a sitting president is a very different business than investigating an ex-president. But, fundamentally, Mueller blinked. It's like he had in his report, if you read it, there's a dozen instances of Trump obstructing the investigation, and he just declined to prosecute any of them. But now we have Jack Smith, who actually is bringing the fire. You know, he
has some guts.
Trying to get him. He's really trying to get him. It's like
wait, should this be finally we've been talking about a segment. Now I'm forgetting what it's called.
Fighters versus
fighter chicken shit, right?
Yeah, fighters versus chicken shits, or fighters versus flighters, perhaps. You know, the people who cut and run.
Fighter chicken shit. We've got a fighter finally.
Yeah,
got a fighter.
A guy who really does seem to be. It's like we got to take this guy down. Structured an indictment in a smart way, like getting him on the clearest and easiest to prove charges and rushing it through as quickly as he could, but also building up like a airtight case. So yeah, you know, where's my Jack Smith He Wrote podcast, whatever, the jacked up.
Okay,
that'd be a good one. So
we can stop worshiping these people and just be happy that there's not another fuck up in position of power trying to do something.
Yeah. I remember, in my piece, I quoted Grant's memoirs. He talks about the right of revolution in there. And he says, yeah, it exists, but, quote, any people or part of a people who resort to this remedy stake their lives, their property, and every claim for protection given by citizenship on the issue. Victory or the conditions imposed by the conqueror must be the result. And, you know, I don't think I need to spell out with great detail what typically happens to people who fail to overthrow the government or fail to carry out a revolution.
It's true.
It is short and it is not sweet. So let's see. Yeah. Should we talk about the possible Georgia indictment coming up here?
Yeah.
There's yet another piece of reporting that dropped on this right as we were getting ready to record, but it's fairly straightforward. This is a piece in Rolling Stone by Adam Ronsley and Aswin Subasing. Swin. Everyone knows Swin. Everyone should know Swin. But anyway, they write, 3 sources who have spoken with prosecutors tell Rolling Stone that they believe Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis is likely to indict not just Trump, but a number of his associates involved in attempting to overturn the election as well. Figures of particularly high interest have included, but aren't limited to, the once obscure lawyer Kenneth Chesebro, John Eastman, and Rudy Giuliani, sources who've dealt with the prosecutors tell Rolling Stone. Georgia's Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations statute offers prosecutors broader authority to define and charge criminal conspiracies than in other states, potentially spelling trouble for Trump campaign alumni involved in the attempt to overturn Georgia's 2020 election. Willis is reportedly weighing the use of the RICO statute in the Trump investigation, potentially giving her the authority to charge others beyond Trump as participants in an alleged criminal conspiracy. And then they've got a legal expert in here saying, quote, one of the most important things under any conspiracy statute is that any statement made by any conspirator in furtherance of the conspiracy is admissible evidence against all conspirators. In other words, it's not hearsay. In this instance, every defendant could be confronted by the stupidest things Rudy Giuliani said.
Tremendous.
Yeah. So that's fun.
Yeah. So are you keeping track of how many different, so we've got New York, we've got Georgia, like can we catch people up on like how many things are in the air at once right now?
Yeah. So we've got 3, official indictments and 1 coming. There's, the one in New York basically for like business crimes, and the Stormy Daniels payment. Then there's the federal indictment for January 6th. There's the other federal indictment for the Mar-a-Lago keeping classified documents in an unlocked bathroom and lying to the government about how many classified documents he had in his possession. That one's in Florida, if you remember. And so he drew Eileen Cannon, who's a maniacal Trumper and is being a real recalcitrant about that, prosecution, even though it's another totally open and shut case. They've got him on tape, waving it around, boasting about how he had these classified documents improperly. But yeah, she's really letting him delay it out for a long time. And then there's the one in Georgia, the state level potential indictment for probably conspiracy or racketeering and whatnot, for attempting specifically to overturn the state election in Georgia. And I'm sure, the call, again, publicly reported on January 3rd, 2021, CNN had the tape and the transcript where Trump was threatening the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, basically saying like, well, if people don't go along with this, they could get in trouble. And, just give me my 11,000, whatever it was, votes. Yeah. And
that's the thing about narcissists. Narcissists, they can be smart in some ways. They don't have to be stupid in every way, but they are necessarily blind in many ways because they're also solipsists, and their emotional state and their desires, like Thrasymachus in Plato's Republic, like that is their universe, that they are tyrants, like a toddler is a tyrant who only understands the will to power and totally uncontrollable urges, desires that they then try to instantiate through their will and through whatever mechanisms they can. But they're totally blind to what's reasonable and rational and what very much can be used against them in the expression of those desires and the seeking of those desires to be fulfilled. So there is definitely an Achilles heel for a narcissist like Trump and like his goons, right? This is, it's just incredible how much that they've left in an evidentiary sense, right?
Yeah. I think the Florida documents case is the funniest one for me in that respect, because, the government tried to give him every opportunity to wriggle out of it. Hey, sure you don't got any more? You maybe forgot about some, Yeah. Typically people they get hammered for improper classified document storage. Remember Reality Winner? She got 5 years in prison for, sending one document to the Intercept jackasses who immediately racily ratted her out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, make no mistake, our system crushes people without power, and there's like an inverse relationship between how much power you have and how much you're crushed or let off the hook, right?
Yeah.
And so, that includes Trump and his cronies. They are incredibly privileged, and because of their incredible stupidity and narcissism, they are still in big trouble.
Yeah. So they knew he had the documents and he refused to give them back. Even that should be like many years in federal prison for not doing that.
Then he lied about it.
Yeah.
Also.
Then he gave some of them back, said he had, but that was a lie. And he had a bunch more, and they raided his place and they found him. And it was like, you dumb motherfucker. If he had just in that the first initial violation of the law, just given the documents back, then he would have gotten away with it. He basically forced them to prosecute him. It's amazing.
It's all, but well, that's the thing though. You almost wonder if it's intentional, because it's a testing of his mantra, which is if you're a star, they let you do it, right? Mm-hmm. That's his worldview that's been affirmed for him his whole life. And he's like, I should be even more true now that I was president and should still be president.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I hope and pray that this maybe inaugurates a cultural shift among the American sort of political establishment that like this shit has gone way too far. Like I was just reading another news story that broke 5 minutes before we were recording, but that the Justice Department the special counsel, whoever had subpoenaed Trump's Twitter data, presumably including DMs. That's what they wanted to read. And they can do that under federal wiretap statute. You get a warrant, and Twitter wouldn't give them. Elon Musk, I'm sure, what he was like, no, this is free speech or some bullshit. Like, no, it isn't. The government can get a warrant. That's in the Constitution, you fucking dickhead.
In fact, the warrant is based on principles of free speech, because the point is that the interference by the government has to be based on evidence that there is some justifiable reason to invade someone's privacy. None of these rights are absolute, you moron.
Yeah. And so the judge said, is like, you don't give this to me, I'm imposing a $50,000 penalty on you, and that's going to double every day that you don't do it. And so 3 days later, they did do it, and she fined them $350,000, which is, I mean, that's not very much for a company like Twitter, but it's also probably teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, thanks to how Elon Musk has totally ruined the place. But $50,000 doubling every day, that adds up quick. Even for somebody like Elon Musk, in a month or so, you're talking about like, what, quadrillions of dollars or whatever. It's like this is Musk and Trump are just peas in a pod, in the way that they just instinctively lash out at critics, do whatever they want. The incredible entitlement that you're talking about, the tyrant of a toddler mindset. They've always been able to do whatever they want, lie, cheat, and steal, and get away with it every time. And now I hope, to be like, we can't deal with this anymore. We need some standards at the top. Somebody needs to be made an example of. And I think that's what's motivating Jack Smith, at least.
Yeah. That's the thing about our system. It is not reliable to do these kinds of things, but it does do them sometimes. And those are instances where we have to be very supportive of those efforts and happy when they succeed, because these little victories matter, right? Because there are a lot of reasons these days to have no hope and to just think those narcissists with power and money will control everything. But they don't always win, and they're wrong in their narcissism and solipsism. Their egos and their power and their wealth are not the only factors that determine reality, right?
Yeah. And I do think it hasn't been this bad for a relatively short period of time. I mean, remember the early Bush administration when the Bush Justice Department prosecuted Enron and Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling and Arthur Anderson, even though, Ken Lay was one of Bush's biggest campaign donors. It was like there was enough, rule of law legitimacy in the system left from, the previous 50 years of building it up under the New Deal administrative state that it was like, no, these guys violated the law and they need to be held accountable for it. And it was only you could also probably talk about the Nixon pardon, but there's a hysterical reaction to Arthur Anderson being sued into bankruptcy for like industrial scale document fraud and destruction of evidence, pulping giant boxes full of evidence, running them through a shredder. And it was like, oh, I mean, look at all these people who lost their jobs for doing all these crimes. Like, the politics of that movie, Liar, Liar, are kind of bad. But that scene, I bring it up, stop breaking the law, asshole. And I think, that's making some more examples out of these people, just be like, there's at least certain standards, it's like, you're never going to have the same standard of justice for the rich and the poor, but you can try to do as best you can, at least.
Well, yeah. And as our friend Dave Kibe has said on Twitter, or I don't know where he said it lately, but it's not bad abolitionism to be against the prosecution of someone like Trump, or Harvey Weinstein or whatever. In fact, it's just status quo preservationism for those kind of guys to get off, and for the poor and marginalized to be crushed by the system. So you're just preserving the current system if you're rooting for not going after these guys, right?
Yeah. Maybe in our last few minutes, we could talk about a couple of other things.
Let's
We've got the American Political Science Association getting completely tangled up in the Los Angeles hotel strike.
Yeah, that could be a whole nother episode, and maybe we could do it. But long story short, right? You have the National Association for Political Scientists holding its annual meeting supposed to be holding it end of August, beginning of September, over a number of days in Los Angeles at the Marriott in LA, right? And the workers there went on strike. So, there's a long, a long story with lots of players in terms of the response of APSA about what to do about that, and that the demands of the union, the demands of many political scientists. Long story short, they were asked to move all the panels online, basically, and have no in-person events, even at other hotels. And of course, a bunch of smarty pants political scientists are like, well, that's not breaking a picket line. These are, what does it matter if we go to this other hotel? And there's there's a lot going on there, because first of all, just do what the union says to support the workers, because they know more than you do. And sure enough, other hotels that were non-strike ended up being hotels where the workers went on strike. And I don't know, you can fill in some of these details, but basically it's just a kind of pathetic show from the association representing political scientists. And many political scientists on social media are embarrassing themselves in the profession by not doing the simple, straightforward thing of not crossing a picket line, which is not just a physical picket line. It has a broader meaning than that. So there's just that, people who are too clever by half, or have just maybe in their hearts no support for workers, fucking up what should be a very simple show of support.
Yeah. I think the point about the union communicating with them is an important one, because you generally don't want to do a boycott unless the union says to do it. Like you see the strike in acting and writing in Hollywood, and a lot of people are like, I'm canceling my Netflix subscription. But the union, last time I checked, they say don't do that. You want to do a boycott that is legible as a product of worker power. If it's just random people doing an uncoordinated thing because they saw something on social media, it's not going to have that effect. It needs to be coordinated, and it needs to be the result of the, sort of union request. But they did make that request.
It has to hurt the right people, but it also has to be understood as being a source of this particular dispute that caused the suffering, right? And that's why it has to be coordinated.
Yeah. And I guess I'm less sort of ensconced in academia than you are probably, but it does seem to me to be a indicative reaction from like certain quarters of academia, like products of the sort of legacy system, the way that it used to work. 30, 40 years ago, you went through grad school and, you're basically all but guaranteed some kind of reasonable middle class salary, at least, maybe not a tenure track job, but like something. Now it's just, it's 30% of something of academic faculty are tenured.
Contingent. Oh, I was going to say, 2/3 contingent.
Yeah. And increasing share of adjuncts who are just paid like dog shit. And, the whole profession has just been proletarianized. And, I think we've seen before,
the irony is, in this situation, though, you would think that would mean that the tenured professors who are protected would be easy for them to support. Like, they make more money, they're protected, and they're not the ones that are attending this conference to try to get a job or to try to get a tenure track position that has stability rather than a contingent position. But you see a lot of people who have the cushy tenured positions with various levels of wealth and status, basically say, I mean, they might give different reasons, but they're just they want to do the fun thing that they already paid for, and they were going to look forward to it, and sure, it was going to be invigorating, and in person is better than online, and what about how this will affect future conferences? Maybe they'll always be online. All of this nonsense is a lot of it is coming from the safe, protected group of academics, whereas the vulnerable ones are in many ways the ones that have been in solidarity, and they're the ones that don't have as much money, and they're losing some money that maybe already went into the flights, that they're the ones that maybe sometimes are looking for a better job or a new job or a first job, whatever it is. And so there's also something interesting going on there in the dynamics that is revealing of where solidarity tends to come from.
Yeah. I mean, people who will experience material harm to their careers potentially from not being able to participate, network, present their research, and all that stuff. And I think, it is just as you say, it tends to demonstrate that I think that the relations of academic production, for lack of a better word, they tend to produce a kind of petty bourgeois, mindset with respect to their own profession. Sometimes, not always. You have seen a fair number of fairly prominent folks coming out and saying, "No, I'm not doing this. I'm not."
That's right. Of course, no. And in fact, guests of our podcasts have been especially good.
Yeah,
there's a whole number of them that we could name. But for example, there have been people who have even offered, because a lot of people, when I don't know if the average listener knows this, but a lot of times what these conferences are about, in addition to the job hunt and networking, is to workshop a paper by experts in a field who can help you get something published because of the feedback they gave you and the way that your paper improves from other people reading it and talking about it with you on the panel and so forth. So if panels are getting canceled, even though the ask is to move them online, so theoretically all that should still be there. People like William Clare Roberts on Twitter was like, "Hey, I'm an expert in these areas. Send me your papers. I will give you feedback." Right? Like stand with the workers and let's do the right thing here. But I get it. People need help. I'm here to help. And then Femi jumped in, and Femi said the same thing, although he had a follow-up tweet. I'll do 4. Let me be clear. I don't have all the time in the world, but I can do like 4 of these, which, that's like what you might do on a panel. That's reasonable. But just lots of great signs of solidarity from, what's funny, it occurs to me, Femi's not even a political scientist, he's a philosopher. So that's super dope of him to do that. But the political theorists have tended to be really good, which is interesting, and maybe connected to the fact that they are much more comfortable with normative kinds of thinking. And I've experienced a lot of non-political theorists who don't think political theory should be part of political science, and things like justice and all those normative questions, that's not what we're up to. And so, of course, that then means what is your purpose? What is your function as a discipline if you're not into normative questions? Your function is to reproduce the current system and understand, quote unquote, descriptively the institutions that exist so that you can sustain them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there are definitely a lot of milquetoast political scientists, to say the least. I remember the fashion, it was a number of years ago that, the party decides, remember that book? I read an article about this in Current Affairs. It was like the consensus in around 2008, the party decides, the elites make the decisions at backdoors that are then ratified in the primary. And then Donald Trump destroyed that idea. But then there was the consensus that for a while, at least among, I don't know, sort of like Democratic Party aligned folks, that actually voters are stupid and policy doesn't matter and it's all about identity. And that, I think, also is a grotesque oversimplification. But Yeah, it's like, especially 10, 20 years ago, it's like you're a tenured professor like at a wealthy institution, and it's like you're just working by yourself or with, a handful of colleagues, and you're sort of producing academic theories, and you're like sort of like making them your own little kind of private property in a way. Like, that this is my thing and I have to build my career on this, that this is my reputation and I made it. And I think it's, if you're not careful, again, it's not a universal thing, but you can turn into a kind of used car salesman type.
That is the typical liberal mindset that doesn't understand how your good is inextricable from the good of others. And you can't just think like it's a collective action problem. You can't just think like, oh, but for me doing this would be better. Like that's the whole point is that you can't think that way, or else the bad things will keep happening. And in this case, the bad things are, our class system dominating the workers. And so, yeah. Come on, people, use your brains here.
I think it's I read about this in my book a fair amount, that it's not even descriptively true of academia, like maybe even especially not academia. It's like you don't own this idea. You built on 2,000 years of other people pushing the ball forward a half inch at a time, and like you're working with colleagues. All this stuff's up in the air. All major discoveries practically are co-discovered by different groups of people working independently.
Absolutely.
Heroic genius is a misleading way to think about academics, even for extreme geniuses like Darwin or somebody. So don't cross the picket line, man.
That's right. So and thanks to everyone who's been supporting the workers, and keep up the organizing and the solidarity and shows of support. Means a lot. These are the fights, the discrete fights that put theory into praxis and actually show what you believe, right? Not just ideals and principles are bullshit unless. Oh, look, you might have to sacrifice. That's actually the point. Sacrifice is painful, or you might lose money. It might be deleterious to your career. It might suck. It might, take away a chance to meet people in person for the first time in a couple of years, whatever. That's how it goes when you're trying to struggle against, powerful forces that are harming people. It's not, what matters more is the question, and how much does it matter to you to look out for those that are oppressed? Yeah.
Yeah. And, I feel it's like people would be harmed, it wouldn't be as comfortable to hold the conference somewhere else, or to move it partly online. But it's like, okay, you just like take the hit on the hotel charge and like move it into a Motel 6 somewhere and have meetings out in a park or something. Like you could make it.
So to be clear, the ask is to put it totally online, no physical locations in LA or anywhere. Yeah, totally online. Yeah. And there are reasons for that. And there's been just innumerable efforts to explain the logic of the union to people. But at the end of the day, you don't really need to, it's not important that you understand the logics, like the union's logic. You just need to support it. That's the bottom line, basically. Yeah. Should we end on some good news?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, some guaranteed basic income experiments. We've got a great piece from one of our interns at the Prospect who wrote about guaranteed income experiments in Rochester, which are funded by the American Rescue Plan, the big old Biden stimulus.
Who's the intern? Give some props. What's the name?
Elizabeth Miesenthal. She's great.
Nice.
And yeah, just, it's funny, it's like they keep doing these experiments. This one's pretty small. It's just taking a couple $1 million and giving, how many, 351 individuals, who are at or below 185% of the federal poverty level, guaranteed income, $500 a month for a year. And so this isn't a UBI. It's more kind of welfare-y, with the means test. But, the point is to sort of like discover, the ostensible point is to discover what happens. What happens when you take people who are working class or in poverty and you give them $500 a month. And we've done, I think, literally dozens of these experiments. and every time it's like, damn, everybody's doing so good. Look at all these.
No, not only that they're responsible. The labor participation goes up. Social problems go down. All the indicators of flourishing communally and with respect to the people getting the money and their families go up, right? Good things up.
Yeah.
It's just, of course, it's never about the evidence or the logic, but, all of the welfare queen, racist, classist language, all of the presumptions that poor people, they're just stupid and depraved and you can't give them money. They'll use it on booze and drugs and whatever. Like, those are just hyperbolic versions of what even quote unquote respectable politicians or, ideologues would say about why it's bad to, look at what happened when the pandemic, the most generous welfare giveaway in our history and in response to the pandemic in the world was done in the midst of Republicans being furious and just losing their minds that some people would be paid more to stay home than to go back to their jobs because of how poorly they were getting paid in the midst of a pandemic where, of course, it was really important to have people, right, not just survive, but also not be forced into dangerous workplaces. And so like the unemployment was just super generous. We cut child poverty in half. We did all these great things. But the moral outrage, though, is not because of the consequences, because the consequences are good. It's actually about a hatred for those who would seek to have more as against those who already do, because to legitimate that equalizing is to undermine the system that creates that inequality, right? And so you have to have that kind of whip rhetorically to say, no, you don't deserve a handout, right? No, you actually deserve to be in that pitiful, poor place where you're suffering, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's sort of like two aspects of that ideology. There's the idea that poor people, like the working class in general, needs to be on the verge of starvation, otherwise they won't work. They've got to have the hounds of hunger, like constantly nipping at their heels. And I mean, the problem with that is it's just not true. There's all these guaranteed income experiments. People actually work more. Exactly. They find it easier to find a job because it's like one of those things. Yes. To like the transaction costs or not being able to like afford a car makes it really difficult to like go out to job interviews and like a million other things.
Right. But besides being abhorrent as like, wait, you're making people suffer so that they work to serve your slavish system. It's not even descriptively true, though, to your point.
Right.
Like, forget about how unjust it would be.
Yeah, no, I think the real thing, it's a moral ideological belief that poor people did this themselves. It's not the system's fault. It's that these people are degenerates and, above all, rich people should be spared from taxation because it would take more than a couple $1 million to do a, universal basic income or like, expand the child tax credit or whatever, like any, universalist welfare state stuff that's going to require taxing people, especially the rich. That's the thing that they want to avoid above all else. And, it's like the conservatism in the income distribution. It's like protect the people at the top and kick the people on the bottom. And that's just,
but don't forget the link. But don't forget the all important link here too. When you starve the state's ability to provide public goods and to care for its people, you legitimate the idea from the capitalists and the powers that be that actually it's the private sphere that takes care of everything and they have all the power and control. Right? Because look at this dysfunctional state. You're paying all this money for what? And so like when people today, because I think 2/3 of people say that their taxes are too high, it's because they're not getting anything that they're aware of. In part because Democrats are so stupid, they hate to brag about anything. They want to like bury the lead every time they do something good. They want want to like get it through without people knowing that the government did it for you, actually. Whereas Trump is like, here's my name on the check. Here you go. But in any case, though, like, it's not just about the taxes taking the money and power from the rich. It's that if the state is using funds for serving all the people, then suddenly, wait a minute, we don't need these quote unquote geniuses in Silicon Valley. We don't need this private sphere to make all these decisions about what we're going to produce and what we're not going to produce and what people should get paid. And they're not going to solve climate change for us. Actually, we're going to take away their power, not just their money. We're going to democratically decide more about how to live, what's produced, and all these things, right? It's about democracy too. Like the fascist anti-democratic thing is totally interconnected, right? With their purse getting like lined. In other words, they want to be rich so that they have the power over workers, so that their class position, their position to decide things and to be in charge of everything remains. Like that's the ultimate reason for the money and reason for delegitimizing the state. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And this is probably why, these type of experiments, they're not, I mean, you're not going to convince many people with just one, but I do think, over time this is having, and it's doing some important political
There's
work.
So many.
That whenever people are like, oh, they're like Joe Manchin's like, oh, these poor people are just going to spend their welfare money on drugs. You can thwack down like a, foot thick ream of studies to be like, no, they aren't. Look at the research, you dumb motherfucker.
Well, no, that's the thing. We forget how many important decisions come down to one idiot from West Virginia agreeing to vote a certain way on a bill that might have billions of dollars of consequences.
Yeah,
and that person's decision, or trillions, and that's not even about. Maybe it's partly about that person's inner ability to accept reality, but it might be about their ability to not say certain things without looking really bad and stupid. And they have to at least perform legitimacy in certain ways among the people that they care what they think, their colleagues or whomever, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the contrast to like the Trump threat is not unique in the sense of there's never been bad actors or bad institutional uses of power before, but like usually it has to be couched under legitimacy. Now, we said even Trump tries to couch it under legitimacy. He really won. But like these guys are mostly blatant, more than we've ever seen before about, no, will to power. We just deserve everything. We're going to lie blatantly. We're going to steal blatantly. People like Joe Manchin, they'll get caught out and reveal that they're getting, funded by, natural gas or the oil industry or whatever. But they will not admit that they're corrupt. They will pretend to be legitimate, and they will say things about, poor people or whomever, with arguments that they want to at least be perceived as respectable by some people, whether it's people in DC or whomever in the Senate. And as you say, over time, certain stances just are not tenable anymore unless you become a crazy fringe. And that's just a different beast, right?
Yeah. Yep. But I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Guaranteed income. We love that's a great experiment where you're getting some nice data out of it, I'm sure, but also like a bunch of people are getting some money.
Also,
yeah.
I love that today, under the guise of like science, let's do some studies to learn things, and actually let's just throw money at people that way, right? It's like these egghead liberals will only give people money if it's to learn something, and we'll just use that Trojan horse.
Yeah. So we love to see that, and we'll, maybe report back if we ever find what the results are in a year. But other than that, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you in the next episode.